Canadian, born in London.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, um, I'm a veterinarian, recently retired, very recently retired. Did a lot of work in clinical practice, both in Canada and in England, and then quite a few years overseas as well. Interesting, I didn't think there was any way, it never even occurred to me while I was going to university. And then after I graduated, I went to visit my brother who was working as a volunteer in Thailand as a civil engineer.
Uh-huh.
Visited him there, met some other people who were doing the same kind of thing, and I thought, well, if I don't do it now, I never will. Do it earlier in your career, you don't do it. So that's kind of what got me started. I met the coordinator for that volunteer service called QSO in Bangkok, in
Yeah.
Thailand. And he said they didn't have any positions for veterinarians, but if I wanted to go, he would create one. So
Oh, really?
that's basically what he did.
Really?
So yeah, yeah. Yeah, we met in Cambodia. So after my time in Thailand, I went to Cambodia. He had already been there for a year. We each spent 2 years there, but they overlapped by a year, so not the same 2 years. Um, I was going up country to visit a site where they were having an animal disease outbreak, and the only way to get there was on a ferry across a river. There was no bridges, and they were filming a charity event for a organization called Blue Peter from England. So the ferry only went so many times a day, and you had to get it there and back before dark, or it could be dangerous. And they were sending this ferry out, coming back, going out, coming back, because they were filming and they were trying to get everything just right. And we were sitting on the bank waiting to cross the river.
So you wanted to use the ferry.
Exactly,
Just, like,
exactly,
the ferry,
yes.
yeah.
And so he came up to the truck where I was sitting and apologized. They were filming Blue Peter, and I'd never heard of Blue Peter, had
Oh,
no
no.
idea what he was talking about. So it was a bit miffed. Anyway, once we got back to Phnom Penh, we started playing. We played badminton every evening after work, and then on the weekends we played volleyball, a group of us, and that's where we kind of got to know each other in a little
cool.
better situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Work-wise, so in Thailand, I was working, well, volunteering at it's a teaching hospital, a veterinary teaching hospital in a rural area. So it was mostly with dairy cattle. There was mostly clinical work, but we started to try to form some herd health programs and stuff with the local dairy farmers. And then from there, I was recruited to go to Cambodia um, with an American NGO, American charity, um, for a vaccination program in Cambodia, and we did some training. Then I did a year with the UN in Cambodia as well, followed directly on from the charity organization. That was we were trying to establish a cold chain for vaccines for the animals, so that we could do better vaccination up country. They have no electric at that time anyway, no electricity, no power, anything up country. So for refrigeration was always a big issue for animals and for humans. Um, then I came back to Canada, worked in clinical practice for a few years, got married, moved to England, worked clinical practice there, came back to Canada again, and I just was missing that kind of humanitarian atmosphere. Um, so I applied for and got a job with the International Committee of the Red Cross, initially in in Ethiopia was the first one, but I did several contracts with them. So yeah, I did several contracts ranging from 15 months was the longest one that was in Ethiopia to about a month that I was in Zimbabwe at one point. So I did that for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And sometimes some clinical practice in between, but back in Canada. Yes. So working for the International Committee of the Red Cross, they only work in conflict zones. So that was very different from my NGO work in Thailand and Cambodia. Cambodia was a conflict zone, but we weren't really part of that at all. But in especially in Sudan, in Ethiopia, we were crossing front lines regularly. Um, ICRC that was allowed to do that. Nobody else, even the UN, wasn't allowed to do that. So we were the only organization that could do that. So yeah, it was very different. You really had to respect the rules and a lot of the safety precautions and that you wouldn't really consider somewhere else. Yeah, you had to be much more cautious. Yeah, we had to get permission each time we went, and we had someone, a local interpreter, who would call both sides of the conflict and say, "Listen, we want to go to this site on such a day. Is that going to be safe?" There was one time in Sudan, my boss from the office called in the middle of we were doing a vaccination campaign. And he called me in the middle of the campaign and said, "You guys may have to pack up and leave on very short notice, so don't venture too far from the trucks. Have everything packed, um, but don't tell them. You can't tell anybody why you're leaving, because we were getting confidential information about something that could be happening, and we couldn't tell the local people." So yeah, and then we started coming back, and it ended up getting dark before we got across the front line again. So we had to find a place to camp, and then again contact the guy who was doing our liaison work, and he had to contact both sides of the conflict and said, "Listen, they're at this part. Don't bother them. This is who they are, and leave them alone." So yeah. Professionally, I think not really any different than a male. Like I felt like I had a lot of respect from both ways. Tech, like socially, I guess more. It was I was always with a team of men. I was usually the only woman there. So when we were traveling up country or anything, I was always the only woman, um, which everybody handled very well. When we were sleeping up country, then people left me alone. There was no issues really with it. Um, Socially, I think it is more harder for women, and I guess that's my perspective, obviously. But um, there are more rules applied to women than for men. We're more restricted in what we can do, as far as socializing with other people, whether it's the local people or other humanitarian workers. Um, it wasn't really expected that we would go out at night, say. Uh, we had to be much more careful how we dressed. Um, I think we were more restricted in that way. Um, yeah, once you got really established, because I lived in Thailand for 3 years, and I realized, okay, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we're told that doesn't happen here, but it does. And things just like the women all got together and drank the same as the men did, and you never knew that until you really got to know. So that kind of thing that was a bit taboo, but it's happening. So, not from the authority so much, more cultural, and from the agency, because you're representing the agency. The only place where I would say it got more political was I did 2 short missions in Pakistan, in Kashmir, which was very, we had to be really careful how we dressed. Not that anybody would they wouldn't even say anything to you to your face, but it reflects on the organization, and they would have words with the organization if we weren't behaving correctly, that kind of thing. So yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, because at first I thought, no, I don't think so, but I actually talked to Jeff about it this morning, and I never thought of it. He said women aid workers were able to get into households and talk to women, local women. They could never do that. So again, depending on the country, Women were never invited, the local women were never invited to meetings, were never part of decision making. But and if I had a female interpreter as well, could get into people's households and talk to women. So who are usually the ones who manage the household finances, but you never, it was hard to get their side of the story sometimes.
Is that cultural?
Yeah, and so the male aid workers would have lots of access to talking to the men.
Yeah.
The first time we did it with the women, actually, we did a training course because women are typically, if it's a small, like they had one dairy cow, say, the women look after the animals. And we were doing these training courses, but it was only the men who came to the courses because that was tradition. Um, so we convinced them if we had a female interpreter and I was there and it was all, our side was all female, could we do a training course for the women? And they agreed to it. And it was quite interesting because we had this tent. This was after an earthquake, so there weren't, a lot of the buildings were destroyed. So we were in a big tent. But the men were all kind of hanging around the outside, which was fine. But eventually they got bored and kind of wandered away, and then you'd hear more stories from the women about how the work they had to do and what it was like. So yeah. Yeah. So, I think be aware, be vigilant. Um, Sometimes I mean, even here, people think, "Oh, that's never going to happen to me," or they're trying to scare me. There's nothing really going to happen. But when you're in a different culture like that, you don't really fully understand what people are thinking and and what's going on, especially in a conflict zone, like who they're thinking about and what's going on as far as other people around and the perception that being from outside, being from the Western world, that you are wealthy and are a easy target. So I think I never felt really frightened at any time. Well, there are a couple of incidents, but just in our homes during the evenings and all that, I never really felt frightened. But you just had to be aware of being just taking a little bit more caution when you do things. I know one episode where I wasn't there at the time, but we were in our own residence. These people were in their own residences, Europeans, and the one woman had kind of adopted a cat who had kittens, and so she'd left her door open so the cat could get in and out. The kittens were in her room, and they were outside tucos, we call them, but so everybody had their own individual hut. So she just left the door a bit open so that the cat could get in and out. And the men came in during the night and they had knives and they were so, and you just don't think it's going to happen, but yeah, you just take more precautions and be aware, respect the culture and realize that when people tell you to be cautious or don't go into a certain area, they're trying not to scare you, but they mean it. So
Yeah.
so yeah, pay attention. Yeah. I think to listen. Um, I know the first time when I went to Thailand and saw the way they were doing certain things as far as raising cattle and that kind of thing, and I would like, why do you do that? That's ridiculous. The typical, I know better, you know. Um, and then you realize there are reasons that they do it the way they're doing, and they are doing it the best way for their situation. But it's easy to go in and kind of think, well, I'm really going to help these people change, that improve things so much because I can see what they're doing wrong.
Right.
But you have to listen and take your time. Don't try to change things as soon as you arrive. Take your time and learn why they do things the way they do. I remember one, like in Thailand when I first arrived, and I couldn't figure out here in Canada with dairy cattle, calves are removed from their mothers pretty well first day that after they're born, and then they're fed milk replacer, and the cow is milked. Um, and they were leaving calves with the cow for like months, and I couldn't figure out why. And it turned out because milk replacer was very expensive there. It was cheaper to leave the calf with the mom for the price they were getting for the milk. So yeah, just little things like that. But to them it made no sense not to do it that way, and to me it made no sense for them to do it that way. So it was just
Yeah.
spending some time talking to people and listening. I had one of my mentors when I went to Ethiopia um, said to me, "Spend a lot of time just drinking tea in a hut with the locals, and
Oh,
you'll
yeah.
learn so much that way." So he says you'll drink a lot of tea.
Yeah.
Be alert, be aware, but respect the culture of where you're going. Remember, you're a guest in the country. So if they have certain way of doing things, then you'll be more respected if you follow their ways, if you're not trying to, push against the tide all the time. So it may mean giving up some of the freedoms, like the way of dress, the way you'd like to dress. Sometimes it just will make it easier for you in the long run if you just respect their norms, respect their culture.
Yeah.
Um, I think one of the other things that I think people sometimes think it's all going to be exciting, and there's a lot of periods of boredom. There's not the same social atmosphere. You can't go out to the movies. Lots of times you just can't go out for a drink, depending on what country you're in. So there's going to be a lot of time. There's nothing on TV to watch.
Yeah.
So you read a lot of books, and you know, there's a good social atmosphere amongst expats, and you can develop one with the locals as well. But it's not the same.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of periods of boredom.
Yeah.
So and and initially, I remember my first 6 months, I would say, in Thailand, some real periods of real highs and real lows, and that kind of evens out after a period.
Yeah.
But the highs of I can't believe I'm here, um, learning this culture, being part of the local community, just such a different way of life. And then there's some real lows, and you're wondering, what am I doing here? Like I don't like the food, I don't like the people, I don't, and it just real high dips,
Yeah.
low. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But like I say, it evens out after a while. So I think other people went home found or people who found it hard to adapt to the local culture.
Yeah.
So I always, whenever I knew what country I was going to, I would spend a lot of time researching what it was like in that country as best I could, just books from the library and stuff.
Yeah.
But you're not going to the tourist areas if it is a country which has tourist areas.
Right.
You're really part of the local culture in most cases, which is what you want, I would think. But you have to take the good with the bad. I should say meeting Jeff, shouldn't I? But I don't think that was it. I don't think a specific. I think one of the things some people didn't like this aspect of it. But one of the aspects I really liked was when you got to the point where local people were asking you to family functions and things, and
Yeah.
I really felt the privilege of that. And I remember one of the questions we were asked when I finished at QSO. One of the questions we were asked was, "Were you ever invited to a wedding or to somebody's birthday party?" Or any of those things. And I think that was their way of measuring how well you integrated with where you were living.
Right.
So, but I always thought that was such a privilege. But I can't think of one specific event. But yeah, yeah. So.